Find out what the truth is. It's out there, prove it. Out here with my druids, smoking, oh my goodness. Ball like Patrick Ewing, right like Frederick Douglass. V's up, 2 times, see it's us, yo. W, been in front, but never been a buzz. I've been enough, need a bump. Adrenaline, I let it pump, like wake me up. She gon' suck like Dyson.
Another big difference is how the pandemic has just fundamentally altered our politics. There was no way to blame the coronavirus economic fallout and destroyed lives on some bullshit personal responsibility narrative, and that has paved the way for justifying a big government response. So
It's interesting to think about, like, I guess I don't like to deal with hypotheticals too much, but, you know, a lot of the complaints from Republicans these days, culture war issues, you know, censorship, all that, are directly a result of Reaganomics, are directly a result of pooling all the money and power at the top 1% of the economy. Completely eradicating small businesses, completely eradicating small town America, destroying Main Street for the profits of Wall Street, as people, that's, you know, the catchy phrase people like to say, but it's true. And all that power that they're now able to abuse, which I'll even agree, it is kind of an abuse of power sometimes. Like, I don't like that Amazon can decide what books I can order from their website that is slowly becoming the only place to buy books. That's not great. But, you know, what the fuck you gonna do about it? Yeah. You gonna just fucking bitch about it all day? Or you gonna fucking do something? Like, you're in government. You're the Republican Party. You did this. Like, if we hadn't listened to your scumfuck asses, and if we had booted the Reagan era entirely, you know, would that I guess I'm getting back to the original hypothetical. I tend to drift from the point, but getting back to it, like, had Reaganomics never taken hold, had America not fallen for the fucking dupe, you know, would we even be in that position? Would small town America still exist? Would you know, local bookstores still be viable? Would would the resources and infrastructure of Amazon have been more proliferated to small businesses? Maybe small businesses all around have a network. Maybe we could invest it in our our federal postal service instead of Amazon, and created a infrastructure, I guess is the word, an infrastructure for everybody to use. And small businesses could have survived the online revolution, you know? But no, they gave all the power to corporations, and Jeff Bezos was like, word, say less. Guess I'll just run shit now. Like, he took the rules they set out, and he fucking played by them, and he won. And now they're bitching and moaning. And it's like, I'm sorry, guys. Like, I'm just happy that Jeff Bezos isn't a complete fucking psychopath. At least, you know, not, you know, cartoony villainy kind of psychopath. Like, what if he was banning all the books that were anti-racist and only platforming racist books? Like, what if you could only buy Mein Kampf on Amazon? Like, he could do that. He could choose. I actually think he could do that right now, and I don't know if anyone would have any ability to legally stop him. If Jeff Bezos was like, fuck it, you can only buy Mein Kampf on Amazon now. That's the only book available. Like, obviously he would never do that because of profit motive and shit. You know, he'd lose out, and that would give rise to some other book company to take their place. You know, Disney makes or something. It would have to have the level of investment that Amazon has to achieve its same status. But point being that, like, yeah, okay, maybe there'd be some market reaction to only selling Mein Kampf that would kind of balance it out, but like, legally he can do that. and that is, yeah, that's fucked up. That's too much power. Corporations are just governments. But our government, of the people, by the people, for the people, is supposed to be above any of their fucking dumbass governments. I mean, the corporate structure itself is inherently fascist. It is. And I think that's why it's the next, you know, democratization of the workplace is the next frontier for freedom-loving humans that have been fighting a war since the beginning of fucking time. You know, for a long time we were just ruled entirely by fascistic, hegemonic power structures, and it's been a long, hard fight to break free of those and establish governments that have some semblance of representative democracy, some semblance of liberty and justice for all. at least saying liberty and justice for all, whereas that wouldn't have even been spoken in the halls of power under a monarchical feudalist system, something like that. Like, liberty and justice for the fucking serfs? Yeah, I don't think so, dude. Are you crazy? It's blasphemy. But we still, I mean, the corporate model, and people argue for it very passionately, which is funny, but like they argue that it has to be the fascist model because that's the most efficient one. So it's almost like anybody who says that is almost, you know, kind of showing their true self a little and saying that, yeah, I mean, no, fascism is bad, Nazis are bad, but you know, I mean, it's the most efficient, right? Like, yeah, it's literally the Stormfront thing. I'm gonna be quoting that Stormfront thing all the time from the boys on Amazon production. It comes full circle. But Stormfront saying, you know, like, people love what I have to say, they just don't like the word Nazi. And I think that is the fucking truest line I heard all 2020, even though I watched it in 2021, but it came out in 2020. Truest line of 2020. People like what I'm saying, they just don't like that word, you know. I think that's 100% true. People like fascism, they have a respect for fascism that they would never admit to, but they, not so overtly, maybe not even to themselves, they might not even be aware of how the reverence they have for fascism. But they'll show themselves when they argue for the current corporate structure, because it's inherently fascist. You know, there's a lot of like propaganda tactics involved, and like company spirit, and there's delegation of responsibilities, so no one has to take any responsibility. You know, like, there's always someone else to take the fall. People in power remain in power. They have a right to be in power. They're better than you. They deserve more than you. If you know you have less because of your failings. You know, like it's all that nonsense that needs to just be completely rejected. I'm sorry, like there's nothing else. There's nothing else to say. There's no defense. There's no saying it's more efficient. It never is. It's not. It's just simply not. Because it can be efficient sometimes does not make it inherently efficient, is my point. Because most of the time it ends in fucking disaster.
Went from welfare queen boogeyman to the most popular and successful policy tool in recent history in the span of less than a year. It was clear. No charity or magical private sector.
Right, not to cut her off right away again, but I feel the need to reiterate this. It is welfare, and I hate that. These are not stimulus checks. It's just straight welfare, and it's kind of gross, honestly. It's not. I don't think it's what the country needs right now. If you want to do welfare, make it super targeted. Give the most money to the most needing people. You know, that's the thing. It's like there's two different goals, and you have to decide what your goal is. The goal of welfare is supposed to be like precision, short term, how to get someone the most help when they need it most to get them hopefully back to where they can survive again. You know, and that's, they can survive without that help anymore. That's the idea of welfare, whether it works out that way or not. And the way you do that is put people, target the individuals who need it the most, and through that targeting, give them the most resources available, so that you don't waste anything on people who don't need it, and the people who do really need stuff, you give them enough where they can feel comfortable to hopefully expand beyond relying on welfare. Stimulus checks, UBI, are an entirely different thing. While they may have some of the same effects, while they may still lift people out of that desperate place and can still help people in a desperate place, the idea is to stimulate the economy. The idea is to put money it's the exact opposite of trickle down economics. It's trickle up economics. It's put all the money in the bottom, because it's gonna go back up to the top. People at the bottom don't sit on their money. They're not just saving. Like, people at the bottom are spending money because they need to spend it. You know, and when you put, that's why it doesn't ever make sense to put money in the top, as if rich people are one day going to be like, oh yeah, you know, I only pay like 2% of my income on taxes, so I'm gonna start paying my I'm gonna start paying my employees more. I'm gonna open a business with all this money. As if people don't just sit on it, let it collect interest, so they never have to work again because they can just let their money work for them. Like, it just doesn't make sense to inject money at the top part of the market. It makes sense to do a UBI that everybody gets, and yeah, it won't mean shit to people at the top whether they get it or not. And it, you know, maybe make an option for people to just write that off and just not take it or whatever. I don't know how you'd sort that out, but the point is, give it to everybody, so it's not mean tested. It's not welfare. It is stimulus. It's to stimulate the economy. It's the same thing we did in 2008, except in 2008 most of that went to the same people who were causing the problems. They got stimulated, and it didn't end up really stimulating our economy all that much. Because again, the money already was at its final point. It wasn't going to go back down to the people. It's not going to go further up. There's nowhere more up to go. It's already at the top of society. You know, it's the top is the sponge. Why would you put the water in the sponge? You want to use the sponge. The sponge will take the water. If you're trying to wet the sponge, like, just put the sponge in water. Don't put water on the sponge. If that makes any sense, I don't know. But that just bothers me. When I found that out, even the first check, I believe, was pretty means tested, and then this one's even more so. It's like, dude, that's just straight welfare. That's not great. I don't like that. It's better than nothing, sure. I'd rather people get help that is wasteful and maybe not exactly what they need, instead of no help. So, you know, take that as you will, but these are not stimulus checks. I feel like I don't hear enough people talking about that. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm stupid. Whenever I start having something that sounds really smart to me, and I don't hear anybody else that I consider smart talking about it, I'm like, wait, am I stupid? Or am I really like the only person who sees this right now? Like, somebody's got to be talking about it, right? All right, anyways, Crystal, back to you.
Job creation was going to save us. The government was our only hope. Our great friend Jeff Stein at the Washington Post had a fantastic piece on this. Yeah. Former Congressman Barney Frank, who helped craft the housing crisis response, told Jeff, quote, "You have a new consensus in America that the government has an important role and that Ronald Reagan was wrong. For the first time in my lifetime, people are saying that the government has done too little rather than doing too much." Now, at the surface level, American politics appears to be a story of two parties with massive differences engaged in daily existential battles. But the truth is, if you zoom out a bit, American politics is actually largely driven by shifting areas of consensus between the two parties. So in the New Deal era, there was a broad consensus around the social safety net and around labor rights, too. In the Reagan era, there was a broad consensus on free market fundamentalism and deregulation. The swing elections we've had from one party to another and the rise of populist anti-establishment politics are a sign that the Reagan era has run its course. It is time for that new consensus to be born. What comes next? Well, it could be an improvement, could be a hellscape. Who knows? But the fizzling of deficit hawk politics is one more sign of its demise, and ultimately it will be far more significant than even this quite significant stimulus bill. And Sagar, this really did go differently than I expected. Yeah. And again, they still vote in exactly the same terrible way, but the energy around cutting the debt and cutting the deficit and, you know, just going all in on that narrative as a way to gin up their base and as a way to secure power, that's kind of dead and gone. And you do see, and we've covered here, look, it's totally inadequate. But people like Romney testing the waters, people like Hawley testing the waters, what could be our version of a minimum wage, what could be our version of a child tax credit. It really does portend the fact that a certain era of politics is coming to a close. Whoever figures out what the next thing is going to look like, they're going to be the ones that maintain a lot of power.
100%. You know, my friend Julius Krein at American Affairs, he has this great riff about how America is always a one-party state. It's just that both parties adopt that framework. So FDR, basically to Nixon-ish, there was a general broad consensus around the New Deal. Then Reagan comes in, brings deficit politics, and really ushers in the true era of neoliberalism that basically lasts definitively up until the end of Obama's second term. Trump scrambled everything, didn't imprint his own.
That's a weird. What is he trying to achieve with that sentence? Reagan era ushered in neoliberalism. I don't think that's inherently wrong. You could say that, but it's a weird way to say it because I don't think Reagan was a neoliberal. I think neoliberalism was the democratic response to the success of Reaganism for the GOP. They were like, oh fuck, we have to run to the corporate center too. We have to run to that. We have to come off as moderates. We have to sell with middle America and Christians. And that's neoliberalism. But Reagan wasn't a neoliberal. If anything, he was what I consider to be one of those first really like radical conservatives, radical conservatism wrapped up in this idea of like being a check on the radical liberals, I don't know.
New version
Yeah.
of politics.
A whole deep dive there.
And that's what roils, this is what's so strange, is Biden is the president. He's basically a 1985 level president, but there's all these different things bubbling beneath the surface. And I think that the fact of why, if you go read the statements, and I did, why did the Republicans all vote against the COVID stimulus bill? None of it had to do with the debt, almost certainly. Almost all of it had to do with culture stuff. I mean, if you look at Hawley's statement, he's like, this is an abortion, Planned Parenthood bailout. If you go and you look at Marco Rubio's one, it was very similar in terms of the types of organizations that are going to get money from this. Tom Cotton talking about stimulus checks going to murderers and illegal immigrants. And it's like, okay, well, in all these cases...
They went to the same people, by the way.
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway.
But I'm saying the attack reveals that it's not that he's against stimulus checks, it's about who gets the checks. So Joe Weisenthal, when I talked about this, is that the new era of politics, and I'm not sure I necessarily prefer this, is about squabbling over how the resources that we consider not limitless, but we don't consider as limited in the past, get distributed. And that means the culture war remains king. So, like we said, it's not that everybody's against checks, but now it's AOC versus Tom Cotton on whether illegal immigrants get checks or not. And now it's whether Planned Parenthood gets to get, stimulus dollars and gets bailed out. Now it's whether, the border, whether you're going to enforce it this way or that way. This is not pretty. Like, people should not delude themselves into thinking that we are entering, like, a good age. So if anyway, maybe Trump, what he did is solidify that he cast aside the deficit stuff, brought culture to the center, and that will essentially be the dividing line of all future policy discussion in the future.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to me, it's really unclear right now.
I have no idea.
I think that is one potential feature, which is why at the beginning when I was like, I'm kind of happy about it, but I'm not sure. Like, it's because we don't know the direction that it's going in, and the fact that Republicans are less vocal about their terrible foreign policy and terrible economics and more laser focused on the culture war, like, is that a good thing? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really
be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily seem like that great of a thing. But, ultimately, because the consensus that you had in the New Deal era and in the Reagan era was actually largely around economics and also around foreign policy, it kind of has been the culture war for a long time. I'm not sure that focus on the culture war really does represent a shift. If the underlying economic consensus does change to being more communitarian and more distributive, that actually would be an improvement if you take for granted that the culture war has been dominating politics for basically ever.
Look, I'd rather be here than there, but I'm not going to say that this is pretty and that it still won't be terrible for a long time.
Exactly. So, but I guess the one thing we can say is, like, that era has ended or is ending, is coming to a close. And right now, the fight is over. Okay, who's going to shape what the next consensus looks like?
No, I think that's right.
All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.
How much responsibility do you feel that you have, particularly against the alt-right, who, as you
Can you have a consensus these days? Because when the entire conservative political ideology is one of aggrievement and perceived hypocrisy. Oh, Jesus Christ, what is this going to be? Oh, I need to see this. But yeah, just to finish that thought. What if the GOP becomes a 30% party? It's already close, I'm sure, of the country population-wise. Voting population-wise. What if they whittle down to a 30% party, but they'll never be, that new consensus won't be seen as a consensus. And I feel like the only reason the last consensus felt like a consensus is that the people who were being marginalized, it wasn't along any kind of ideological line necessarily. It was more along like racial class lines. Racial and class lines. The intersection of both. So that consensus of like 70% of the country, well, that 30% wasn't all necessarily like Democrats or voting Democrat, whatever. It was an amalgam of all the people whose voices couldn't be heard in a pre-internet, pre-modern era. This new consensus will be very vocal, or this new anti-consensus, I should say. This new marginalized group will be a self-marginalized political ideology that venerates homogeny and isolates itself to be a permanent victim class that is actually probably has, in terms of economic class, no right to call themselves such. Damn. This is the taxi trivia driver. This is him now. Feel old yet? God, I botched it.